process of aging and death on Earth is not the natural manner in which people usually die. The withering of age has been dramatically accelerated. This is the work of Satan. Natural death as a result of proper aging is very different. We gradually become tired and lose interest in life. This fatigue intensifies until we simply fall asleep and pass on from the life. This natural process of death is a consequence of our having experienced everything of interest in that lifetime. When there's nothing else of interest to experience, it's natural for the soul to accept death so that new experiences can be sought. This fatigue due to a lack of interest in life is a way of bringing the person in life to a willful acceptance of a natural end to their lifetime. The diminishment of the body and mind is also a means by which to ease us into the position of being ready to pass on. It's much easier to let go of a diminished body than a healthy one psychologically. On Earth, people pass on long before they've had the chance to fully explore the experiences which draw them, the experiences with which they encounter a psychic charge, the experiences which have vitality and energy in relation to their personalities. Perversely, it's the withering of age which convinces them to abandon those things which still draw them, and then leads them to pass on. It should be that the full exploration of all interests, such that there remains minimal psychic charge, then leads a person to tire and wither due to a lack of engaging reasons to interact with the creation. In my time, I've discovered two paths to eternal youth. I'll share them in later videos. Both are beyond my means in my present condition, but really, neither is a path to true immortality, because this process of aging comes for us all over time. Death is a natural part of incarnational life. I've come to a deeper understanding of the nature of sin and death, and I finally understand the true nature of the battle between light and darkness, and the necessity for the conquest of death in the sense of separation from God. I understand something of what is to be gained by this work now. Let me try to explain. To do this properly, I must give you the grand narrative of all creation and detail the chain of authority which has led to our creation and our present circumstances. At the center of everything, at the beginning and end of all things, is the true Father, the true Alpha and Omega. He has access to all degrees of freedom, and there is no end to his curiosity and his exploration of finity. When he chooses to, he imagines a set of rules as the basis for a string of universes. He then forms a God. This God creates a universe, the first of a string of universes projecting along a single direction or single degree of freedom, in the sense that new universes along this string are only formed in one direction. There are many degrees of freedom within these universes, but they are projected as a string in one direction. This first God knows of the existence of his Father, but the true Father somehow causes every subsequent God to be unaware of him. He sets the string of universes in motion. The true Father is free to divert his attention anywhere he likes after this, and obviously he has the capacity to be simultaneously aware of all things, but I've witnessed him moving his perception, so I think he is selective about the focus of his attention. I saw him rotate his perception away from one string and onto another. Try to picture the structure of the great multiverses as something akin to a plasma ball, but less chaotic. At the center is a great sphere of being, the true Father, and out from him are projected many strings, and each string is composed of a series of evolving universes. Obviously, I should add, the true Father isn't limited to the degrees of a sphere. These strings of universes have their own base rules, but each universe represents an experiment in evolving those rules. Over time, each God begins to tire just like we tire. There is a natural form of death. This is the reason for the creation or choosing of a son, to whom all authority is passed. This son becomes the next God in an unbroken chain of authority, continuing the exploration of finity. previous gods don't truly die, however. They simply enter a form of hibernation. They drift in and out of sleep. They are the great dreamers of dreams. Their dreams are filled with the experiences of their creations. When they wake, they speak with each other, and they watch the progress of the universal string. So far, none of these gods has formed a creation matching the True Father's desires. The True Father is experimenting with the rules of creation as part of a great search. Try to understand his situation. He decided to explore finity, but how do you do that? Remember that he is a mind, and that his thoughts have creative power. There's only so much thinking that can be done before the thoughts are set in motion. The only solution to this issue is to experiment with the design and rules of creation through a series of universes, always reaching for perfection, always reaching. Many very flawed creations have been formed over time. In the beginning, he gave too much authority to some, not knowing that it could or would be abused. These were teething issues as a result of poorly defined rules and were no one's fault. There is no cause for blame, only a search for the solution, because these universes still exist. There are places where the concept of music doesn't even exist. There are places where the instructions given to the God of the universe were so imperfectly formed and so poorly interpreted that the people are forced to eke out an existence at the level of bare subsistence, working all hours just to get by, given no opportunity for joy except for sex, which is only for procreation, where even the possibility of rising above the drudgery is forbidden by God, because he believes that all beings must work to live, and has no consideration for entertainment or leisure. Worst of all, however, is one of the earliest creations, a place where such authority was given to the God that he was able to fully control the levers of life and death. Part of him became rebellious, and using this power, it locked down everything under its authority in a state of perfect death. In that place, nothing moves. Everything is still, in a form of stasis that leaves everything looking like lifeless statues. Only the God of that place moves, and he covets his possessions. This is the heart of a great darkness. This is the heart of the darkness which stalks earth. The God of that place is a true Gorgon, stripping life from everything that becomes his until it becomes statuesque, but not stone. Stone would be merciful in comparison, because the people are still trapped, and he can access their awareness so as to torment them and exact his will upon them. The True Father has been seeking a solution to restore life to this place of pure death. Death like this exists nowhere else in all of creation other than where the Gorgon has authority and chooses to use it this way. The hell we know, the outer darkness, is brimming with life in comparison. This darkness infects the universes and spreads. The true Gorgon is very clever and a master of contracts and tests. I call him a Gorgon because of the nature of what he does, not on account of his form, and I wanted to make that clear. The gods of the universes each have a book. This is their prized possession because it contains a narrative formed of events within their creation. Each of them has raised up mighty heroes according to what they deem to be true strength. They've tested them against great darkness and moulded them over time. Many of these people are truly wonderful, and many of their stories are utterly tragic. At some point, I don't know when, during the progression of a universe, a request comes to the God of that universe from the True Father. I don't know quite how this happens. Somehow these gods remain ignorant of the True Father's existence. It may be that there is a level at which these gods are aware of him that is above the level at which they engage with their creation, and that a message comes from there with the request. Think of it like the difference between a person when planning a life and when living the life. Both exist and both live, just at different levels of being. Even when a god passes on their authority, they continue to live in both ways, as each god has a form of infinite processing power, so that during their lifetimes they can simultaneously communicate with all of time according to the rules they know. So a request comes. The request is for a hero, a champion. A hero is needed to take on a great quest. It has been in the nature of these gods to create heroes, and they are made to choose their best. It is recommended to them that they send only one, and that it should be their best. Some have obeyed this recommendation, others have not. A hero is chosen and sent. Their god always has great faith in them and loves them dearly. These are the heroes of their book. They've been well tested and greatly cherished. The gods love to share their books with the other gods. It's a very intimate and personal sharing because it contains a select narrative of their creation, a select narrative from their very being. There is a somewhat arrogant and boastful streak in many of these gods, and most believe that their book is the greatest. Each of them wants to share their book, but few are willing to read the books of others, as understanding them requires an effort of comprehension due to differences in the rules of creations. Not all of the great dreamers of dreams exist at the same level of fatigue. Many passed on their authority before they became tired, so as to avoid the sleep. Others held on so long that it is considered extremely inappropriate to wake them, unless there is an extraordinary reason. Some sleep occasionally, others almost constantly, others almost never. Thinking about it, it may be that their processing power appears unlimited, but that it actually does have limits, and that is a reason for their sleep and why some are rarely woken. Many gods have refused to send a champion, knowing full well what has happened to every single one of them. Every hero has failed, not one has succeeded. Every one of them has been lost. These heroes are taken to the world of death, the home of the true Gorgon. I think that the core of this darkness is a world, not an entire universe. It struck me as I was writing the content for this video. The authority over life and death had been passed down not only to the god of the universe, but also down to the lesser gods of galaxies, and even to those who are the souls of worlds. There is a planet at the heart of great darkness, and the heart of that darkness is the true Gorgon, who refused to return authority that was given to him, and shut down his world in perfect death. The heroes are filled in on the circumstances of that world and the consequences of its existence in this form. If they agree to tackle the challenge, the True Father takes them through a process of preparation which teaches them how to process the different rules of this creation. Free will is always upheld, which is why some heroes who never stood any chance have been allowed to take this test. When the champion is ready, they are permitted to choose equipment and also to choose which level of their being will take the test. Each of us exists at many levels. Our forms on Earth are only an expression of one particular level of being. I've seen champions take their highest level of being, and I've seen champions take the equivalent of our level of being with them. Taking your highest level of being is risky because it contains the others, so you only get one shot at the test. Taking a lower level of being is risky because you exist in a lower state of being and have reduced abilities, but if you fail, then you can attempt again using a higher level. The problem with this is severe, however, as I've seen what happens. The Gorgon has control of the level of being you lost, and so attacks you from within, and this distraction makes tackling the challenges far harder. I remember a champion of tremendous strength. He had endurance like no other, and was forged through great trial to be an unmatched warrior. He had the capacity to endure staggering physical testing. He was certain that he could take the Gorgon's head, and took his weapons of war with him. He never stood a chance. He set out in search for the Gorgon, but but couldn't find him. He was setting camp and lighting a fire when he froze like the others. I should add that this isn't a place where the temperature is always absolute zero. This world is a place of contracts, and there is a contract to be signed before a hero enters the world, which allows for the climate to be set as they choose when they take the test. This contract sets the terms and conditions on the attempts agreed by all who take the quest. Most choose to make the world bearable, yet unpleasant, as they need to be able to move and live, but fear the consequences of asking for something comfortable. Another champion was a man of great courage. He had tremendous confidence in his goddess, who loved him dearly. He had always gone into the darkest places on her behalf, and endured many trials. The request for a hero had fallen upon him, having reached his goddess. Yes, I said goddess. And thinking about it, now that I'm working through these memories, I believe that this is a true goddess, at the same level of being as those whom I've called gods of universes. There can be male and female gods at the level of creator of a universe. They are rarely female, and this is in part because the act of creating a universe is very masculine. It is the act of reaching into the unknown, grappling with potential, and forming a creation as a creative union between the masculine reaching and the feminine mysterious unknown which awaits the reaching. Attempting to create via a union of female and female in this way has led to unsatisfactory results. These universes have lacked the definition and potency of those created by male gods, and these goddesses have been targeted for ridicule by many male gods, on account of this, along with their rarity, and as a result of these gods having a poor grasp of the truth of how things should be. As a result of this, these goddesses have been eager to prove themselves, to prove that they have something valuable to share. Proportionally more goddesses have submitted heroes than gods, but because everyone has failed, this has only encouraged the scoffers. I'll make a stand here then, in defense of these goddesses. The notion of a female creator at this level of being is relatively new and unexplored. The creation evolves over time as new discoveries are made, and many advancements which will come to pass already exist as a form of potential. What is missing is the discovery of the key to unlocking the creative power of these goddesses. It's not that they lack power or ability, but that a key discovery needed to unlock their potential hasn't yet been found at this level of being. The required precedent hasn't yet been set. Just as the precedent of the conquest of death is being set through Christ, so too will the precedent needed to unleash these goddesses be set. I suspect that a god and a goddess will simply need to have sex, so a way needs to be found for them to connect in this way. This would likely dramatically upgrade the formation and nature of universes. Sounds like a fun precedent to set, although it'll probably have a horrific cost to establish. Try not to think unkindly of the gods who scoff. Remember that they are a product of experimentation and have been poorly instructed and defined. The champion that this goddess chose was very dear to her, and she had bestowed many gifts of wondrous items upon him as rewards for his work. He agreed to go because she said that he was her champion, and that she trusted him, and he had always trusted her judgment. Sadly, he hadn't even evolved past the level of being which we inhabit. He didn't understand the contracts he was being shown. He felt completely out of his depth because he was completely out of his depth, but he trusted her absolutely, and he refused to let her down. Such was his courage. He entered the world of death and simply set off running into the darkness. The Gorgon swiftly became bored watching him and froze his being. The Gorgon covets his possessions and always inspects new additions to his collection. He was very disappointed to discover the lowly level of being of this man, so much so that he almost missed his possessions. He almost passed them over dismissively. Unfortunately, he did notice, and he was delighted with the haul. The goddess had given many gifts, and these were all extremely potent. But the true treasure was the light of a great star. This light had passed into the Gorgon's possession, and he used his newfound authority to invade her universe. The star now belonged to him, and he established himself menacingly in the heavens, greatly intensifying its light and projecting tormented light into her universe, beating down curses upon all life within reach. She moved everything she could away from his influence, but in that moment she knew. Her beloved hero had fallen. Her book was now a tragedy. Another goddess was a goddess of virginity. She had elevated herself such that no suitable man could be found for her. Her status was too high, and none was deemed worthy. She had strict notions of decency and strict rules about sex, along with strict punishments, especially for men. She looked down on men. She longed for a suitable partner, but there was none. Her champion was one of her priestesses, and she was a virgin of tremendous beauty. The goddess herself was reputed to be beautiful beyond any comparison, but she hid herself with light, as few were ever deemed worthy to witness her beauty. They were extremely serious about this virginity, such that her champion had been a virgin throughout all of her lives, throughout all of her evolution from at least our level of being. This is a staggering length of time, and she too longed for a partner, but her goddess saw no one as worthy of her. Many suitors had come, but all had failed the tests of the goddess. This champion was credible and was believed to have a chance of success. She was disciplined, strong, and intelligent. She had also evolved to a high level of being. Many of the great dreamers of dreams chose to rise and watch her attempt. She entered the world of death. That world is a world of contracts and tests. Most champions had failed to truly appreciate that, but this priestess was skilled. She perceived the contracts and engaged with them. These contracts defined the terms of the tests, and completing these tests was the only way to reach the Gorgon. Each test was fairly written, as anything less would have been an unbalanced action, and the consequences would have harmed the Gorgon's interests. The Gorgon had made these tests as difficult and varied as possible, whilst remaining balanced according to his extensive knowledge of true contract law. The contracts weren't written on paper, but hidden in many ways. Some were written in forms of light, visible only to those who'd evolved to a particular level of existence. Some were in the air, some hidden on the ground, some appeared only at particular times. The contracts themselves were often very cleverly hidden. Just finding the contracts was a challenge. Each contract stipulated a cost and a reward, balanced according to its difficulty. The priestess began to complete these tests, and in response, areas of the world came under her authority and were freed from death. This was the reward for completing the contracts. She made good progress, and there was hope among the observers, but then she froze, and no one knew why. Not only did she freeze, but the whole world returned to a state of death, and her work was undone. The Gorgon was very pleased with this addition to his collection, and approached her. He was looking forward to ravishing her, making her his own sexual plaything, and was preparing to slither into her mind to begin her torment when he saw the girdle around her waist. He recoiled in horror, for this girdle guaranteed her chastity and imposed a penalty of sin upon anyone who looked upon her lustfully. He felt himself become bound by sin. He was alarmed and worked quickly to determine her origin. Discovering this, he made a proposal to her goddess in secret, placing as much time pressure on her as he could. The goddess in her incarnation wasn't aware of the proceedings, which are kept secret from almost everyone. He proved to her that her champion was his, and he offered to free her to try again in return for forgiveness of his sin. She agreed, and those who had been watching the priestess saw her unfreeze, but she swiftly refroze again. They didn't understand why, and they wondered if she'd somehow found a way to undo the imprisonment, but it didn't happen again. She remained frozen. When it was discovered that the Gorgon had been bound by sin and forgiven, they were not happy, as that was a real foot in the door on the path to defeating him. But nothing could be done about it, and the attempt had ended in failure, just like all the others. She belonged to him now, but he dared not approach her on account of her girdle. The conditions of the girdle forbade anyone other than her from removing it. He lusts after her greatly, knowing her purity, knowing that she belongs to him, yet knowing that he can't have her because of the girdle. Soon after this, the contract offered to challengers was updated to forbid such items from being brought into his world. Many places throughout the creation have been frozen on account of the Gorgon. These possessions are also part of the reward available to anyone who can conquer the world of death. Many of these territories and peoples became his as a result of champions falling to his tests. So then, what of this Gorgon? What is its relevance to us? The Son of Man is to be a champion, and is being raised in preparation for this work. He is the great hero of our book. Once the work on earth is complete, there is far more to do. The President of the Conquest of Death can liberate many, but other work must be done to make this liberation spread as widely as possible. The Son is being raised up to face the Gorgon's tests, but why should he succeed where every other has failed? What does he have that the others lacked? What is the superpower of the Son? What's the superpower of Christ? His superpower is his connection with the Father. The Father guides his words and his actions, but crucially the Father also molds his character so that it more closely aligns with his own. This character, as far as it has been revealed to me, is a character of radical love and acceptance. Don't misunderstand this as acceptance of sin. He's no pushover, and he gives us the tough love we need when he offers us correction. But our concept of sin and his concept of sin differ radically. Where there is true consent at the level of the soul, there is no trespass and so no sin. Every act where this consent is present is lawful. Death as we know it is a consequence not only of our inability to accept this great truth, but also the result of every previous God having failed to understand this law. People and gods keep forbidding lawful acts. This will end. When Christ comes to a person and heals them of illness or of sin, what do they experience? What do they see and feel? They experience a fullness of love and acceptance. And this acceptance is transformative. When we are truly healed of sin, this acceptance will live within us. Christ isn't selfish with his superpower. This connection to the Father is available to each of us through the Spirit of Christ. A sinless being is one filled with loving, compassionate acceptance, and completely innocent and unashamed in reaching for the satisfaction of their needs and desires which spring from the truth. They also innocently and unashamedly satisfy the needs and desires of others when they come in the truth. Everything is according to the true law. The war against sin has in many cases not been a war with sin at all, but a war against lawful activity. This war has had devastating consequences. It is the source of the great fatigue which brings a form of death to the gods themselves. It is also the cause of the accumulating damage which is accrued to the Son himself. Nothing can truly be cast off. Thus, at the end of each universe, all rejected things must be processed and integrated in the mind of each universal God. Everything comes home. The creation exists as a vehicle for the exploration of finity. When lawful activity is hindered or forbidden, this exploration loses vitality. It becomes less interesting. The beings who are denied expression experience a form of psychic bafflement, and the activity which had a vital psychic charge is not explored. Remember what I said earlier about death being a form of tiredness, which accrues as experiences lose their charge and life becomes less engaging? That is what has happened to the great dreamers of dreams and the sun. At the end of every universe, when everything came home, that fatigue came along. This accumulated over time and doesn't seem to heal. The more that a god has misunderstood sin, and the more zealously they have punished lawful behaviour, the more rapidly they have grown weary, and the sooner they have passed on their authority. In the Son's case, I believe that the Father and the Son have attempted to conquer death before by other means. I believe that in prior universes, the Son protected his Father from the trauma of returning sin by processing it all himself. They have been attempting to eliminate death by processing every sin independently, having the Son understand and accept this perceived sin, and having him defuse each situation in person. I don't really understand this fully, but I saw him appear in situation after situation and express the perspectives of each participant to the other such that they stopped hurting each other. I also saw him take the place of others by entering the experience from the perspective of their soul, such that he was in their bodies. Then he experienced the trauma whilst forgiving each participant. This isn't easy stuff to convey, but the consequence has been that the Son has grown weary in place of his Father. Eventually they learned that the solution to conquering death was to set a great precedent. But during this conquest, the Son has found himself in positions where, out of compassion, he has baffled actions which would have led to suffering. They have been imposing their incorrect perception of goodness upon everyone else, and this was stifling the vitality of experience. They eventually learned the true definition of sin, but the fatigue had accumulated and doesn't seem to heal. I suspect that establishing the correct definition of sin and freeing the prisoners of death will go a long way towards revitalizing the creation and easing this fatigue, the fatigue of the unfulfilled. I suspect that this weariness has been passed to the diminished Son and should be healed upon the conquest of death. I also suspect that the closer we get to God, the less fatigue we encounter, until there is no fatigue at all, because the true Father does not weary. We mustn't limit lawful expression. It bears a terrible cost, because limiting lawful expression saps our vitality by making experience dull and unfulfilling. I have seen the restoration of the great dreamers of dreams. Remember that each god has a book, and they love to share their book. The dreamers of dreams love the mental harmony of repeating themes. They love riddles and encountering apparent contradiction where there is no contradiction. Much of the Bible isn't written with only us in mind. It is designed to capture the attention of the dreamers of dreams and draw them to the Son. I saw their reaction to the conquest of death upon seeing the restoration of Christ. I felt a great power of mind, and a being exclaimed, "A new thing!" This prompted excitement elsewhere, and others looked and exclaimed, "A new thing!" Tremendous power of thought converged upon this novelty. Great minds were roused from slumber and merged to process and integrate the new discovery. We can set it down, and we can pick it back up again. We can set it down, and we can pick it back up again. We can set it down, and we can pick it back up again. The new precedent was adopted and was sorely needed, because the great dreamers of dreams are very honest and can be very naive. Evil people have tricked many of them into passing authority over their creations to them. Before our Father and Son, the passing of authority and creation of a new God was very direct. The son or daughter didn't enter a creation, but was formed directly and given instruction and authority so that they then made their own creation. This creative authority is the tip of the spear, forging ahead into new territory. Fortunately, the evil ones have never grasped hold of this to my knowledge. Authority over existing creations remains with the God who created them. Some evil people have slowly accumulated authority within creations until they've obtained a majority of authority. They've then tricked these gods into believing that they had a son, and that this son was to inherit all of their authority. They demonstrated their power over the creation as a form of proof and convinced these gods to hand over their authority. They never received the tip of the spear this way because that isn't the method by which that authority is passed. It isn't passed into a creation, but onto the one who is formed to create the next creation. I saw this terrible process. I saw a God who was so happy and proud to have a son. I saw him pass that authority gladly, and I saw that impostor son immediately turn and torment and torture the God using this authority, breaking his heart. These gods are honest and full of integrity, and despite the suffering, they have not broken the rules to pick up their authority. Their usual response is to pass on the tip of the spear to keep it safe. The saddest thing I saw in the torture of the God was his refusal to believe that this wasn't his son. He kept asking, "Why, son? Why are you hurting me, son?" He was certain that there must be a good reason for his torment. He had accepted his son, and he wouldn't reject him. Their suffering ends with this precedent. They are freed by this precedent along with their creations. Great evil will be stripped of great power. This precedent also frees the Father to take authority from Christ if he so chooses. So there is no need to fear that this is one of those situations, especially since Christ already has the authority and doesn't abuse it. I also remember Christ existing with the Father before the creation of our universe. I remember the creation of our universe through Christ. He is the Father's true Son. Along with this precedent, these gods will learn the true interpretation of the law. I saw the tortured God pick up his authority from the false son. But what happened next was actually very amusing. The false son simply expected to be cast off like sinners had been before. He knew what to do from there, so he wasn't worried at all. But he didn't count on the God having the true interpretation of the law. The God said to him, "You've been very bad, son. You will have to be punished." And he devised a suitable path home for him, a path of repentance. This son was shocked and horrified that he wasn't being cast off like he thought, and kept insisting that he wasn't the God's son. But that just caused his punishment to deepen. His father wouldn't let him go. The next time I saw him, he was a being of great light, and his father was introducing him to another God as his son, saying something like, "This is my son. We had a rough start, but he's come around over time. Isn't that right, son?" "Yes, Father," came the reply. This precedent of being able to pick up authority again also returns the dead from exile, granting a path back to life, rescuing a staggering number of people. It also isn't the only precedent which is to be set. Christ is to enter the Holy of Holies as a woman before his Father. Christ will have the power to switch between a male and a female form, and will become virgin every day. He is to be a woman for his Father, a woman worthy of being intimate with the Father. Their creative union will bear fruit. This will also be a creative union in the heavens between Saturn and Jupiter, and planets will be conceived. So much of life revolves around sex, and we must do great work to liberate each other from sexual repression. Without freeing our minds, we cannot hope to become useful in the true Father's great work, because we will be hypocrites before the true law and without foundation. A house divided against itself cannot stand. If we cannot handle the intimacy of sex, how can we become intimate with the pure truth? The sexual experimentation on display in the heavens will not be hidden. They will explore each other in many forms. Eventually Christ will be as a man, whilst the Father will be as a woman. The Father will conceive of the Son. This will set another great precedent and will be seen by the dreamers of dreams. A new thing, they'll say, and the process of integration and evolution will occur once more. The precedent is this. All of creation had previously gone in one direction, but now the creative flow had turned back on itself. Creative exchange was flowing forwards as well as backwards. What comes after affects what comes before, rings the chorus of the great dreamers of dreams. Suddenly there are no more dreamers. All of them awake. Vitality comes to the whole of our universal string. The gods come alive and create once more. Movement is possible between all creations on our string. They all exist simultaneously. The future extends infinitely in an infinite present shared by all. Movement between universes becomes commonplace and creativity surges. Awareness flows back down our string until it reaches the true Father. His awareness turns upon us, and the greatest voice thunders. I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the end. The gods come face to face with the true Father and see the truth. Their cry of, "A new thing!" is quickly silenced as the true Father reveals that this is nothing new, simply an inevitability. This happens every time, sooner or later. Everyone's understanding of creation evolves. Every universe can now evolve in a new, additional direction, allowing each to continually evolve. The true Father moves his perception, and we continue to experience and grow. I should add that his voice gets stepped down where appropriate, so that all hear it where they should, yet no crisis of authority occurs. This new precedent is key to the growth of Christ, and opens the way for the advance of the light. Christ leads a campaign against the darkness of the old universes. There are many suffering under great evil, much wrong to be corrected. Christ can't do this alone. He needs allies from among all those who are ready and willing. I remember a god who showed him their book, and there was a wonderful tale of a great and noble hero, but there was tragedy. And this god was so upset about the book because this hero had sacrificed himself to protect his people. To save his people from the king of the underworld, he'd agreed to be bound in the pit for like 1,000 or 10,000 years, some ridiculously long time. Unfortunately, when planning the life, it became obvious that he couldn't do it without shattering his mind beyond recovery. He couldn't take the incarnation, so he couldn't take any incarnation, and couldn't protect his people from the conquest of darkness. The king of the underworld had a permanent trophy of his lifeless form chained in the pit and was free to conquer. Christ couldn't endure such a trial either, but in time he encountered a race of sentient trees. These trees lived extremely long lives and didn't move much. The terms of the hero's contract required him to go and guaranteed that he would be allowed to receive everything he needed for sustenance. Christ and the god found a creative solution to the problem. The soul of a sentient tree agreed to help, and so under the guidance of Christ and this tree, the hero's god created a special tree to house the tree's soul. Suddenly the king of the underworld became aware that the challenge had been accepted. He went to check on his trophy, only to find a sentient tree in its place. He was furious and insisted that the hero had to come, thinking that the contract had been breached. But the tree directed him to a special seed hanging from its branches. In this seed was the soul of the hero. The contract was being fulfilled. The tree spent the time producing seeds and directing love and nourishment into the hero's special seed. The hero's seed grew large over time, and many of the other seeds asked their parent about him. They were jealous of the affection he received and the length of time he had been receiving nourishment. The other seeds were taken away from time to time as they matured at a natural rate, and they had noticed this discrepancy. Part of the deal with the tree was that its seeds would be protected and given a place to grow, and the God of that universe upheld the bargain, such that groves of telepathic trees were planted in the world, and their influence was calming, and their wisdom deep. They became sources of old knowledge, and were highly venerated. The seeds were told the story of the hero seed, and were satisfied, and began to direct affection at him also, the hero seed, which had no voice. They had learned that he needed to sleep in order to endure the trial, and they treasured him. The king of the underworld was furious watching the hero seed grow, because the terms of the arrangement also trapped him in the underworld for the duration. The world above was freed from his influence, and the damned trees were a growing source of goodness. He decided to restrict nourishment to the tree, so that it received only enough to sustain itself and the hero. The other seeds knew that they would die, and they gave themselves willingly to nourish the hero. A penalty was exacted upon the king of the underworld for his cruelty to the tree and its seeds. God was angry, for God had agreed to uphold the tree's ability to procreate. He had justification to assault the underworld, and the underworld king swiftly relented, fearing for his kingdom. The king was extremely angry, and he resolved to ambush and kill the hero when the contract was fulfilled. Eventually, the seed had grown very large and was held just above the floor. As the contract ended, the seed opened, and a human form came to kneel in a fetal position on the ground. The hero awoke and stood. He had been nourished and vitalized for a tremendous span of time. He was overflowing with life. He resolved to leave the underworld, but the king ambushed him. The hero had no need of manufactured weaponry. He formed his sword and his armor of light. Light surged from his being and scattered the forces of darkness. The hero fought his way out of the underworld, and the hero was free. Free to weave a tale that his God could share with joy, first of a line of mighty men. Throughout the creation, tales will be rewritten, but the darkness is not idle, and the work will be hard. Christ will learn and grow, then the time will come. Christ will be put to the test on the world of death. Those places he had freed had been given to him. The worlds without music had melody. The worlds of drudgery knew joyful leisure at the time when Christ entered the world of death. I've seen his work there. The outcomes I see change as I grow. He accepted the challenge and was prepared for the work. He reviewed the contract and signed his consent. He was asked what he would bring, and he decided to go naked. They asked what level of being he would use, and he took the highest. As for authority, he brought everything. With the consent of everyone under his authority, he risked everything. This made even the true Father nervous, because Christ hadn't only gained authority over his universal string of origin, but his light had marched through every string. If everything fell to evil, then the true Father would be left to build the light over again from the beginning against massive opposition. Some chose to go ahead of him, willingly giving themselves to the darkness as witnesses to the light. His city of refuge was among them, and she testified of him and the Father to the Gorgon, who used her for his pleasure. She gave herself willingly, for love was freely given by those of the light. The Gorgon was deeply affected by their faith and love. Maybe this was the one, he thought. All under Christ's authority were free to view the attempt. This was no longer a secret to them. Christ entered the world naked, and when he arrived, he became as still as stone. There was concern that it was already over, but everyone under his authority was still free. Christ had made a wise decision, for the very air and ground were a trap. Every other champion had failed with their first breath and with their first step. The Gorgon had simply toyed with them after that. His form had no need of breathing and was capable of holding perfectly still. He had projected a barrier of thought just beyond his outline to keep the air from touching him. Had he been wearing clothing, the barrier would have been too far from him to be permitted under the rules. Whatever the air of this place touched was deemed to be trespassing. Had it touched him, it would have exacted a penalty of souls. Those under his authority were ready and willing to be taken ahead of him, confident that they would be recovered. He set about engaging with the trials through thought. It wasn't long until he had room to move. Soon after, the air was no longer a trap. He had a foothold within the world. The challenges were varied, but the Father guided him. He began to free the champions. For each there was a trial. Everyone was surprised by the pleasant temperature. The world was warm. Christ explained that there was no cost to setting a pleasant temperature. Everyone had been repeating an error out of fear by choosing to be cold. He freed the man of strength and the man of courage. Each champion had a skill set, and the Son had long ago learned to utilize the talents of others. Challenges of great endurance were perfect for the man of strength. Most overlooked the man of courage due to his level of evolution, but not Christ. The Son took him seriously, for he had proven his bravery. Doing so meant that he wasn't deaf to this man when he suggested using his wondrous equipment. So the Son became aware of the wonders in his possession. The priestess was difficult to free, for the Gorgon prized her. When she was freed, she was shocked by his nudity, and then shocked further due to the activation of his curse. He was attracted to her, so the girdle had given him sin, which activated the curse. She was deeply concerned that this was an evil man, because his father had cursed him, and because of the way he openly and shamelessly enjoyed his curse. She kept her distance, but saw how he directed everyone, and how they trusted him, and how they made progress. Yet every time she approached him, his curse activated. Eventually she grew accustomed to it. Many of the others had struggled with it at first too. The champion of strength was particularly offended in the beginning, but the shameless honesty of the Son and his openness made it very difficult to dislike him. These champions were paragons from an era of imperfect truth, having been lost before much great change had come to pass. The pure truth was challenging. The priestess began to be able to talk to him and explained the girdle to him, which was a great relief because he had felt authority leave him but didn't know where it had gone or why. Not every test was passed on the first attempt, and many people under Christ's authority turned into statues, only to be freed once more upon success. Areas outside of the world began to unfreeze as the trials were completed. Eventually they reached a trial whose terms required the surrender of all the progress they'd made. Christ informed all who'd been freed about what was going to happen, and many were so confident in him that they struck humorous poses when they froze once more. Ground was retaken quickly. Heroes were freed once more. The priestess became very close to the Son, but there was always the problem of the girdle and his curse. He didn't hide his desire for her, and she was certain that she'd finally found a worthy partner. One day she approached him, and she had removed her girdle. She had lived her entire existence as a virgin, and had been frozen in the world of death for untold ages. She wanted to know intimacy. The Son knew her well as a result of their time together. He knew how much she loved her goddess, and that her goddess would never approve of them if he took her now. They both knew that he refused to marry, and that the goddess insisted on marriage before sex. He told her to put the girdle back on, that they would go together and make their case to her goddess. The Gorgon had been watching and sensed an opportunity. He created a new test for them to find. They soon found this test, and it was a test of lust. The son considered taking it, saying that this was something he needed to work upon, but the priestess adamantly protested and was chosen in his place. The test required the removal of her girdle, as no such items were permitted. The son sensed a threat and told her before she began the challenge to remember that he would not attempt to have her until they had seen her goddess. When she reappeared, she was flustered. She had completed the trial, so the son approached, and she swung her sword at him in warning. She wouldn't believe that he was real. It took some time to convince her, and he had to reaffirm that they would see the goddess first. Apparently she had passed the test easily, or so she thought. She was confronted with a number of sexual opportunities, each of which was easy to reject due to her training. But the last temptation was the sun. She had resisted this, and the test had appeared to end when she was approached by the sun, who congratulated her, but then began to tell her how he couldn't wait anymore, and that she'd waited long enough, and that they should be together. He'd come close to her and held her, and she'd wanted to believe it was really him, but she gradually came to her senses and fought him off, for it was the Gorgon, making his play for her virginity. He'd pushed her right to the limit. After this, they decided to take a break. They left to see the goddess and make their plea. This universe was not under the sun's authority or the Gorgon's, and so was not aware of the events on the world of death. Some places like this had been left, likely as part of the father's plan. The priestess went alone to see her goddess, who was angry with her because she knew of her lust and that she'd removed her girdle out of desire for a man. Upon discovering that her virginity was intact and that the stain of a man had never touched her, the goddess was satisfied and delighted to have her hero return to her. She learned of this new suitor who had freed her hero and agreed to meet him. The priestess didn't give the whole truth and had hoped to hide it. When the time came, the priestess dressed the son in clothing she had chosen to impress her goddess. He wandered off just before they were to leave, and she alerted him that the time had come and that they shouldn't be late. So he teleported them both into the goddess's hall of chastity before her throne, where they were intended to go. The priestess was looking at her goddess, who was hidden by light, and so was surprised when the goddess shouted, "What is this?" The priestess was confused. The goddess asked her, "Is this the man?" This caused her to look at him, and to her horror, he was completely naked. "Yes, it is," she replied. "I can explain." "I won't hear it," said the goddess. She was furious and attempted to use power to remove him. But even though this was her universe, the sun had long ago become far too powerful for her to remove against his will. This infuriated her even more, and she ordered her guards to remove him. But they couldn't advance upon him because he willed that they couldn't, and his truth was greater. The goddess stood up and revealed herself in all her glory so as to cast him out, but still it did not work, and worse, she too had a girdle of chastity of great power, and her beauty caused him to desire her, which caused his curse to trigger, and such was the magnitude of this sin according to the power of the girdle, that the angel was very, very angry, and took him cruelly before her. The goddess was apoplectic with horror, watching her sanctuary become defiled in this way. She raged against him, but her rage was impotent, for there was nothing she could do. The priestess was mortified. The son enjoyed every moment unashamedly. He was completely open and honest about his desires and needs. He felt no shame. When the angel was finished, and the goddess finally calmed down sufficiently that they could communicate, she resigned herself to speak with him. He offered her a deal. He would show her the story of his existence, make his case to be with the priestess, and the priestess would also speak. She would then be free to make her decision. After that, he would leave. She agreed to the terms. She saw how he was the Son of God, yet had fallen into terrible sin and become the worst of all sinners. She was disgusted by this, yet was bound by her word to watch. She saw him rise out of death and return to glory, and his actions from there. She saw his increasing trials and the depth of his love. The intensity of light continued to grow until she couldn't bear to watch. She begged him to let her stop, for the light was more than she could bear. He made her give back the authority which had been taken from him through the girdles, and then he released her from her bondage. She had seen enough. She had seen as much truth as she could bear. She consented to their relationship even without marriage. This man was worthy. She found herself envious of her priestess because she saw this man as worthy of her too, and she had yearned for a worthy partner. She humbled herself and asked her priestess if she too could be with him. All of them agreed to the arrangement. They could both be with him. What later transpired between them was much like a type of hentai game, which is highly underrated, where you begin with a girl who won't even show you her tits, but through interacting with you, by the end she doesn't even fear tentacle monsters. You could use the words defile or corrupt, but really the most accurate word is liberate. He opened them up to experience. That genre of games needs good artists, developers and writers. It's totally undervalued as a niche, but the quality of existing content is low. Eventually they were resolved to engage in a process of penance. They had forced sexual repression upon the people and elevated themselves, so they became servants of the people in a very direct sense. They became messengers of liberation. The people loved it, and so did they. There was something very wonderful about the release of that pent-up sexual frustration. Prepare the way for the Lord in the wilderness. Make a straight highway for our God in the desert. Every valley shall be lifted up, and every mountain and hill made low. The uneven ground will become smooth, and the rugged land a plain, and the glory of the Lord will be revealed, and all humanity together will see it. In the kingdom of heaven, everyone is a servant, even the king. The high places are brought low, and the low places are raised high, such that all things form a plain, and we all become equal before the true law. Both the priestess and her goddess were very distorted according to the true law. They were protected from the consequences for a time when they came under that law, so that they would have opportunities to change their ways. Had the consequences accrued to them immediately, they would have become wretched and ugly and tormented. It would have been sudden and unfair. Breaking their pride and opening them to experience, bringing them down from their high places, saved them from a terrible fate. For that place had been a place of terrible darkness, and their beings had been full of corruption. At some point the champions returned to complete the work. At one point the Gorgon appeared to the heroes. He was seen crying on the ground in the distance, but the sun instructed everyone not to approach him, that they were not to take shortcuts. It was an obvious trick. They had endured many trials, trials of courage, of knowledge, of endurance, of mathematical ability, of lust, of logic, of trickery, of skill. The trials were exceedingly varied, and by the end the son was forbidden from listening for the father to guide him. I suspect that this was a trick, and not a lawful condition on a contract, but that the stakes made this a very challenging test of the son's faith. His decision here could go either way, I suspect. The rest of these trials are written from the perspective where he loses contact with the father due to making the wrong choice and doubting the father's command. One particularly difficult trial required that any challenger agree to forget the nature of the trial upon failure, and that they couldn't know the nature of the trial until they accepted it, at which point they were taken to a secret place for the trial. They kept taking the test, and none of them knew why they were failing because no one remembered what the trial was. The solution was quite simple in the end. It was to reject the trial. I believe that this was a trial that tested their knowledge of true contract law, that the answer was to reject the trial because you cannot be forced to accept a contract without knowing its content. The final trial required that everything be placed on the line. Christ had to risk every soul under his authority. Every soul consented, and he had everyone linked in such a way that they could help him process the problem. He triggered the trial, and a great series of nested circles of light appeared ahead of him. Each circle contained writing which changed with time. They were different languages. The circles rotated, some clockwise, others counterclockwise. All of it needed to be understood and solved in order to find the solution to the trial. The whole time the projection advanced upon him, and it needed to be solved before it struck him. He was not allowed to move from his position. Together, the people of the creation solved the problem. It was a test of his heart. Only those who lacked hostility or any thought of revenge were allowed to pass. The projection struck him and passed by, and he heard crying nearby. The Gorgon lay fearfully upon the ground in tears. Christ said, "Brother, it's good to see you." He went to him and embraced him warmly, and the last of that great darkness passed into his kingdom. For at the heart of the darkness is this truth. The darkness has its origin in rejection. Fear of rejection, resentment of rejection, the rejection of truth, such as the sovereignty and value of others and ourselves, the rejection of truth such that people choose to place their will above that of everyone else, the rejection of our needs and the needs of others, fundamentally, the rejection of the truth of God. Light and dark are acceptance and rejection, set within the framework of God's true law. We have been rejecting lawful activity and fueling darkness. With true acceptance, the darkness becomes light once more. Death truly dies when every lawful activity finds true acceptance within all of our hearts. There is more to this, however, for the seeds of another great darkness are being sown even now. There is more than one great darkness with which we must grapple, but the establishment of true acceptance is the foundation stone upon which we may build our house of worship. A house divided against itself cannot stand, and whilst we reject light as darkness, the light is divided. Upon the foundation of true acceptance, the light can make it stand. From there we can work to accept all those who do truly sin, for the origin of that darkness is also within rejection, and its solution also loving acceptance and understanding. I'll give the details of this new threat in part 2 of this video. After Christ had healed all darkness, he was fully the true Father's Son. All authority was his, and the true Father said to him, "Ask anything in my name, and it will be given to you." Christ replied, "Thy kingdom come." The true Father was filled with excitement and thought through what it should be, for I suspect that he was free to think without being forced to create. There was a problem. Sin had not been fully eradicated as they thought, and his kingdom couldn't yet come, so he prepared the path to his kingdom. The Son was still marked by unforgivable sin. He bore the curse of his father. Each instance of sin had to be cleansed, and each instance would require an epic quest. The number of counts was staggeringly high. Breaking God's curse had to require significant effort and would take much time, even with the support of all creation. But that is a story for another time, and I do not yet remember it. All the best.